Every now and again, I get asked to comment on whether X, Y, or Z item is legal, illegal, to own, to carry, to use, and all of these sorts of things. So this one in particular is talking about knives. Now, unlike many things, I have made my opinions clear about knives, and I don't think that it's necessary to carry them in a public place, particularly when so many people are getting hurt. So that, as an aside, that's my overall position. But I am nonetheless asked to comment on certain things. So I thought this one in particular was quite interesting, because many of you will be aware that there's been new legislation to put a ban effectively on quite a large number of different items, and certain types of knives included. Now, some of them appear to be between the lines as to what's been banned under the definitions and the restriction. So in this particular case, my opinion, not a legal opinion, just my thoughts, has been sought as to whether or not this particular knife falls and is caught within those new restrictions of the legislation. So without it being legal advice, because it's not, these are my thoughts. And for what it's worth, I have run these past several other barristers, one of whom is King's Counsel and agrees with my view. And so I will put this to you. I will ask you to comment what you think in the comments section below. Now, just for the avoidance of doubt, that's not to disagree with our legal opinion. We are qualified to give a legal opinion for a reason. And so without it being a legal advice, of course, this is our legal opinion for what it's worth on this particular knife. So let me take you to a video of this knife first of all. This is the knife in question. This is what it looks like. But actually, even before we do that, let me explain the change in the law and why we're even discussing this knife in the first place. So let's move to the restriction of offensive weapons and the amendments that have been put in place. That's the wrong piece of legislation. It's this one here. So we're talking about the amendments to the Restriction of Offensive Weapons Act of 1959. These amendments were brought into place with the Offensive Weapons Act of 2019. Section 43 specifically amends what is the definition of a flick knife. Now, a flick knife is one of the things that is a restricted offensive weapon under the 1959 Act. And so this amendment here substitutes the definition for the following. So it now becomes any knife which has a blade which opens automatically from the closed position to the fully open position, or from a partially open position to a fully open position, by a manual pressure applied to a button, a spring, or other device in or attached to the knife, and which is sometimes known as a flick knife or flick gun. And so essentially what that really means is you press a button and out pops the blade, or any other kind of spring function or any other device which by any manual pressure applied to this button or spring or other device makes the blade open automatically. So that is what a flick knife is defined to be. Now we can move back to look at the video showing this knife itself. So this is the knife, and you will see from this short video how the knife opens. So from a closed position, this is how the knife, you can see the bit in contention here is this sort of lever portion attached to the back of the blade. So watch this video to see how this opens. So you can see there, manual pressure applied to this lever on the back of the knife, and the knife immediately opens. So just running that manually on the video through here, if we take it frame by frame, you can see here this lever with manual pressure, as it's referred to in the legislation, applied to this lever here. Now, admittedly, it's not a button, it's not a spring, but I'll explain why several of us barristers believe this will be caught by the legislation. So by manual pressure to that lever, you can see immediately it rotates and flips the knife open to the fully open position. Even if that knife were, let's say it were halfway open about here, and you from that point applied pressure to this lever, whoop, the knife comes open. So from the open position from the closed position, manual pressure, open, pops the knife. So now moving back to the legislation and looking here, by manual pressure applied to a button or spring. Now admittedly it's not really a button and it's not a spring, but the reason we believe that this will be caught by this restriction is it encompasses other device in or attached to the knife. And so in our view, this lever on the back of this blade is caught within the other device portion of this interpretation and attached to the knife. And so even if we look at what we refer to as the mischief of the legislation, looking to the reason behind the legislation. Now, our view will be that the legislation is designed to prevent any such knife that opens quickly, automatically, by some or any manual pressure applied to a button, spring or other device. So all encompassing under that mischief interpretation, any other device with any manual pressure, it opens the knife. Therefore, we take the view that it is caught within these restrictions. And just to clarify, if this were to be prosecuted and it were challenged by way of appeal on the legal analysis as to whether or not this really is caught by the legislation, then if one were, let's say, convicted for ownership and having this knife, then it may well be appealed by way of case stated if permission of the court is granted, and that would mean the court would then state the case for the Court of Appeal to comment upon the legality and the interpretation whether this legislation catches that knife. So that would simply be, this is the case and this is the question of law for the court to answer, and it remains my view that if that were even to go to appeal, that I believe the Court of Appeal would uphold that and say that that is what the legislation intended to restrict, and therefore it does catch this particular knife within the legislation. And so whether or not that seems very restrictive or not is one thing, but at the same time that is the view that I take, that this knife will be caught within that legislation. So I hope you found that an interesting overview on this particular knife and something like it. And just by way of a clarification, I would take a different view to knives that have got the thumb button, which is used to open a blade, because that is not an automatic opening. It requires continual manual pressure for the full opening circle or radius of the blade movement to open that blade. So a thumb stud attached to the knife, in my view, does not get caught within this legislation, but this lever as such on the back of the knife, several of us take that view that it would be caught by the legislation. So I hope you found that interesting. Please do continue to send me these videos that you have these questions about, and I will give you my views. Not a replacement for legal advice, I repeat once more, but just for your general interest and analysis on this channel. So I'd really appreciate you smash that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.